there. Yeah. Yeah, it's like so many things I want to talk about, but
You don't
not
want to
before
talk
the
about
show.
them, yeah?
Not before the show. So we look like a bunch of lumps on a block.
So where you live, are there lots of trees that are changing the way they are around here?
Not quite as much. It's a little warmer there, and our real autumn colors begin in about a week from now.
Really?
Yeah, it usually happens towards the end of October for us. Upstate, just 20 miles, it happens 2 weeks earlier. But no, you've got a jump on us.
No, wait a minute. So further,
Just upstate, away from the
20
water.
miles, 20 miles away from you.
20 and 30 miles further up, it's much cooler because it's away from the water.
Yeah,
Right? The Atlantic keeps things milder in the fall, unless we have a real cold snap. But we don't have those, you know.
I think we're basically like at peak color right now down here.
You think so?
Yeah. Because I think that over the weekend when we have all that rain, all those leaves are going to go away.
Yeah.
I still
Yeah.
see a lot of trees
big
that haven't
Yeah,
changed.
still a lot of green out there.
Yeah. The first ones just began to turn.
Yeah.
But our high stuff will be 2 weeks from now. And most of the upstate will be done by then. It's just weird.
What do you think of the promos for the Ford versus Ferrari movie?
Well, I want to see it,
Yeah, I
clearly.
just want
But,
to-
you know, one of the things I had read is they have Carroll Shelby driving Lee Iacocca around, and Iacocca's so scared that he starts blubbering like a baby. I doubt that ever happened.
I've seen that clip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen the clip.
Is that,
too.
I kind of doubt that ever happened.
Yeah, I don't know.
So, but, I mean, there was talk earlier in the summer of maybe even an Academy Award for the movie. So I don't know if that's just PR spin or if it's actually good.
Ken Miles was the essential ingredient for Carroll Shelby. Ken Miles was the real genius behind. He was an engineering, a natural engineer, and a development driver of such ability that he really made the Shelby cars work. That's why he was so upset in '66 at Le Mans when they orchestrated the
1, 2, 3.
flying finish,
Yeah.
and he got robbed of the win because of that flying finish, because the French officials said, well, wait a minute, that whatever car started further back on the grid, so you guys finished second, and he never forgave anyone for
Yeah.
that. Miles was bitter about that till he died.
Huh. Who's the other guy that I knew there? Roy
Roy
Lund.
Lunn.
Yeah, who I got to meet late in his career because he ended up at American Motors.
Yeah.
He's the guy who did all the all-wheel drive stuff.
Yeah.
And boy, you know, when you look back at that, he really helped kick off the whole move to all-wheel drive without the use of locking hubs or levers inside the car or anything like that.
Yeah, the Eagle.
The Eagle.
The Eagle,
That
right.
was a nice unit. I mean, that would be a collectible car these days.
Not the Eagle wagon with
Yeah, yeah, the Eagle wagon.
Yeah,
That's an interesting old car.
right.
Tough.
It was interesting how they made it a sub-brand and did a nice job at that.
Well, yeah, and then back to Ford, the Total Performance campaign was one of the most brilliant marketing campaigns ever. And the high point of that in the 60s, I mean, Ford was,
Well, that, and then, you know, the Cosworth Ford Formula One engine.
yeah, I mean,
You know, Ford was so powerful in racing at that time.
they were everywhere.
But they never used Formula One in the States much. They did in Europe, but they didn't use it here. And they could have. They used NASCAR here.
Well,
Why didn't
but
they use
come
Formula
on.
One here?
Come on, NASCAR, Formula One.
Well,
Yeah, but even in the day, NASCAR was still a very regional southern thing.
Yeah.
Very
And,
regional.
but F1 was still not
It
that
was
well
exotic,
known.
and remember back then it was truly stock cars, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sort
so-
of.
Well,
Unless,
ish.
Unless Smokey
Yeah.
built it.
That's right. Okay, we're getting close
Only
here.
unfortunate last name.
Help me.
Here we go. Watch Autoline After Hours live at Autoline.tv every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 12 p.m. Pacific. You can subscribe to this podcast for free by searching for Autoline in iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, your journey, our passion. Lear, a global leader in automotive seating and electrical systems. Borg Warner, propulsion solutions that support a clean, energy-efficient world. And by DIA MTS, for advanced manufacturing machinery and lightweight components.
All right, everybody, welcome to Autoline After Hours. Gary, hello.
How you doing?
I'm doing great.
At the top of the show, we saw that you can get the podcast on iTunes. And do you realize that 18 years ago yesterday, the first iPod came out?
Man.
So what struck me about that is we talk about technology on the show all the time, and I mean, if you look at that original iPod, it's just like an ancient artifact, right? I mean, things are going so fast and so many changes, and I just was thinking, wow, those original iPods compared to today.
What we have today, right?
It's amazing.
Yeah. Hey, who's that character to your left?
Someone else who is quite amazing,
It's the auto extremist.
Yes, in
Peter.
the flesh.
Peter.
Good to have you here.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons we wanted you on the show is because of the guy who's sitting to my right,
I was only invented 18 years ago, too. So,
Ted West. Thank you for coming on the show.
pleasure to be here.
So I know you from our road and track days, which goes way back when.
And driving Mustang GTs around the Ford Proving Ground and
Remember doing that.
all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, we've had some good times. Yeah.
Okay, but we got to connect these two guys. Why Peter and why Ted?
Well,
Because
Ted's got a new book.
this.
So Ted's got a new book called Closing Speed.
Closing speed.
Yeah, so we got a picture of it up there. And, but this is, okay, you got race cars on the cover. Take it from there. What's this book about?
It's about race cars.
But it's a novel, right? It's
Yes.
not like a history of racing or
Most
anything.
certainly not a history. It all began when in 1970, the editor of Road and Track, James T. Crow, who was the best editor I ever worked with, and he made Road and Track what it was for many, many years after he left. He walked up to me at Riverside in the spring and said, "How would you like to go to Europe and cover the Porsche 917s and the Ferrari 512s? They're having their big showdown this year." And I said, "I'm packing tonight." And I was ready to go because it was, I mean, we hear a lot of talk about the Ford Ferrari thing because of the movie that's coming out now. But in some ways, the Porsche Ferrari thing was even more spectacular. It was much, much faster. And it was much quicker to form. It took Ford and Ferrari a long time to get rolling because Ferrari just kept beating Ford. And it took Ford a long time to get up to the place where they were beating Ferrari. This thing happened really in about a year and a half, and the Porsche 917,
We got a picture of that up there.
we've
now.
got a picture there. That's it. That's Joe Siffert's car. You can tell because he had a mustache, and that red thing on the nose is symbolic of Joe Siffert's mustache.
I never knew that.
That's why they have that. Yep.
And we should mention, that was Ferdinand Piech's car.
That's right.
I mean, this is the guy that later went to run the whole Volkswagen group and the like, but to break into the company, he had to start at Porsche first, right? And I think later went to Audi and then went to run the whole thing. But
Yeah.
He also did the 908 Spider, which is
before this,
before that, which is I thought was my all-time favorite Porsche, except when I actually saw a real one in person, because those things were designed for the Targa Florio and also the Nürburgring. But it's shocking how small it is. And when you see the front nose off, those chassis tubes were so small, and the driver's feet were out in front of the front wheels. It was just like, wow.
Very dangerous.
2 feet in front of the front axle, practically.
But it was
the
still
first thing you would hit was your feet if you went in wrong.
Right.
Ferdinand Piëch was an absolutely brilliant guy. He was part of the Porsche family, of course. His last name is it's Piëch, but they are the Porsche family. And he saw an opportunity in 1969 through a rules reading, a very expert rules reading, where he could design a 5-liter car as a Group 4 car that would win overall at Le Mans, because the FIA had wanted to make the class racing 3-liter cars. And Matra and Porsche had a 3-liter car. There were several cars that were going to be 3-liter cars, and Piëch recognized that there was a hole in the rules where he could do 5-liter cars, and they would be legal, and they could win overall. And of course, they were much, much faster than the 3-liter cars. And the FIA, the international governing body of racing, said, well, we can't have just one 5-liter Porsche winning everything. That's not fair. So they went to Ferrari and said, please, please, build us a competing car. And Ferrari said, well, we don't have one, but we'll do what we can. And in very short succession, designed the Ferrari 512. 512S was the first model. And it was a more powerful engine, but a heavier car because it was hastily designed. It wasn't quite as fast, excuse me, as the Porsche, but they were very close. We see on the screen. That's what the 512S looked like. It was a gorgeous car, a wonderful sounding car, as was the Porsche 917. Very different sounds. The Ferrari was a V12 water-cooled, and the Porsche was an air-cooled flat 12, and they were just brilliant sounding, and all the world knew they were going to be fast, but they had no idea how fast. We're talking about 1970 now, at Le Mans on the Mulsanne Straight.
Which didn't have chicanes.
Which had no chicanes, no slow-me-downs. Vic Elford went 248 miles an hour.
That's crazy.
And
248.
And also, the initial 917 was evil. It was an evil handling thing.
Yeah, that was the car that raced in 1969.
Yeah.
And, Piëch and the Germans that were in charge of designing the Porsches at the time believed in streamliners. They wanted long tail cars because they thought that was the real answer for top speed. Well, it is in a way, as long as you get the streamlining just right. But they didn't. And the streamlining caused uneven loading on the tail of the car, which literally made the car flex. And as it was going straight, it was moving sideways, the full width of the Mulsanne Straight at 248 miles an hour. And only Vic Elford was able to drive it without just completely going nuts. Their main drivers, Joe Sifford, Brian Redman, Pedro Rodriguez, refused to drive the long tail in 1969. And even in 1970, they only drove the short tail, which was more stable, but considerably slower on the front, on the main long straightaway. It had better lap times because it cornered much better. It was much more stable.
So why 1970 for the book rather than 69 or
Because
71 or?
The 512s weren't even in existence in 1969. The 917 only debuted in 1969, and they were still hunting around trying to make it work, and that was the period during which Ferrari was saying, okay, this is what we're going to compete against. And that's when they went home and built. And 1970 was the first confrontation of these two cars. And everyone knew. I mean, the crowds at Le Mans in 1970 were enormous, 350,000, nobody knows for sure. And they're enormous crowds. There were huge crowds at Spa, all the other tracks, Brands Hatch, Monza, and I got to go to all
So
of
you
them.
followed, you followed
Because
them
of
around?
that nice James T. Crow. He said, go to all of them. And so I and a dear friend of mine, F. David Stone, who was covering for a Canadian newspaper, we just got a car from Renault and drove around the continent, went to a racetrack every second week, and we went to the Targa Florio, which is where the cars that you were talking about, the 908-3, it's the third version of the
Right.
908. It's this tiny little car. The engine and the transmission were ahead of the rear axle in that car, unlike almost all other rear engine cars where the transmission is behind the axle. In that case, everything was put within the wheelbase of the car so that it was really quickly maneuverable. And it was
Extremely short wheelbase, extremely light.
yeah, and it was just a cruel weapon at the Targa Florio and at Nürburgring. They had 5 of them at the Targa Florio, and they won handily. And they had 4 of them at the Nürburgring, and they won there too. But there were 2 teams at the Nürburgring and at the Targa Florio. One was fielded by John Wyer, the Gulf Wire team,
Who had done the GT40s for Ford, right?
who had done the GT40s before that for Ford and for a couple of years, and were now Porsche's nominal factory entrant. But Ferdinand Piëch, who we talked about before, said, wait a minute, this season is going to be too good. I want to be part of it. So he showed up without even telling his own John Wyer team. He showed up at the first race at Daytona with his own team, Porsche Austria, and another 917. And from there on, there were 2 Porsche Austria 917s.
With Martini.
With Martini,
Martini and Rossi.
but there were Porsche Austria
Right.
too. And there was enough competition between him and Wyer that at the Nürburgring, where we were talking about the 908-3s racing each other, the Porsche Austria team knew that there was an oil drainage problem in the 908-3 that would cause them to fail, their engines to fail, unless they had an extra oil tank. They didn't tell John Wyer's team, their own entrant, about this, and the John Wyer cars didn't finish, and the Porsche Austria team of Piëch won. That's how competitive they were. Piëch was a demon. He was a brilliant, brilliant man. He's the reason that Audi's all-wheel drive established itself. He's the reason that Audi is known for its performance now. He was the guy who established that whole tradition. He was amazing.
So was there a personality that sort of balanced his from the Ferrari side, or didn't that happen during that season?
There was nobody to compete with Ferdinand Piëch. Their head engineer was Mauro Forghieri. He was a very good engineer. But there was a certain amount of too little too late in all of the Ferrari planning.
And we should just say the picture that we have up here right now,
That is
Ferdinand Piëch.
Ferdinand Piëch.
Yeah.
That's he just died just recently,
Yeah, yeah.
about 3 months ago, something like
right,
that.
this year. Anyway, go back to Forghieri.
Yeah, Forghieri was a good engineer, and he could run a team, but they needed a guy like Piëch, a field marshal, and that's what he was, a field marshal who saw the whole picture, saw what he was going to need in 5 months from now in order to win. Forghieri was just busy trying to get the damn engine to work.
Plus he had Enzo over his shoulder.
And nobody really knew what to do going up against people as organized as the people from Porsche who made the engines bulletproof. The Ferrari engines were bulletproof. There's nothing wrong with Ferrari's engine engineering.
Yeah.
But the cars weren't finessed the way the Porsche was. And the Porsche had another year of development also, to be fair. So it was really its second year.
The Ferrari wasn't finessed. ultimately until Roger Penske and Mark Donohue bought a 512M. They called it the M.
Yeah.
And that was the most immaculate, pristine, Mark Donohue developed Ferrari 512.
What year was
512M that Penske had
Yeah.
was infinitely better than the 512Ms that Ferrari raced themselves.
Yeah.
It was a magnificent car, but it had bad fortune in the races it was involved in. It should have it scored on the pole for its races, but it got crashed by other people, and it didn't have any success. But it was far and away the fastest car of its time.
You know, it's interesting. I'd forgotten about Penske getting the 512M because he then took the Can-Am version of the 917 and raced it in Can-Am.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Wasn't that the 917K or
917
10.
10.
917 10, and then after that 917 30.
Yeah, but Donohue personally developed that car
Yeah.
at Porsche.
The engineers had been developing that whole turbo package for quite a while, and then Mark had a huge input in the aerodynamics. He was responsible for it having a great big rear wing. They were still kind of thinking in terms of streamlining and trying to reduce drag and that sort of thing. And he said, "No, you're dead wrong." Because he'd been racing at Indianapolis, driving McLarens with big rear wings, and he said, "No, you got to have downforce."
Well,
Massive
didn't they have a
downforce is
problem
everything.
too early in the Can-Am season where the car would go upside down?
It flipped on him.
And the first-
Wasn't that Road
did a-
Atlanta or
Yeah,
something
the
that it
first
did that?
the first race practice. Road Atlanta had a particular hill that the Can-Am cars were just almost flying off, and Mark was injured. That was in '72, and Roger called George Fulmer and said, "You got to fill in," and George ended up winning the championship.
Didn't Fulmer flip too, though?
No,
Hurley Haywood did.
yeah, there might have been one other
There
too.
have been
but
a couple of
it
people
was
who did. Yeah.
But two things about the '70 season that I think maybe our readers or viewers don't know. Daytona and Sebring were on the international calendar, which is a travesty that they're not, today, because they always were. And we talked about this before the show, these were the most beautiful race cars, I think, in
Yeah.
international racing.
Yeah.
And I don't think anything's eclipsed them.
Yeah.
Cars today just are not as svelte and streamlined looking as the cars of 1970.
They hit a sweet spot in 1970. I'm shocked that I'm even saying this, but it's finally come to the point where a Ford GT40 looks a little old.
Yeah.
The nose of a Ford GT40 is not streamlined, it's square, and you think, oh, that's an older race car. You look at a Porsche 917, and oh, they got that right.
Yeah.
And you look at a Ferrari 512, oh, they got that one right too. Oh, those two should
still look
race.
good.
Those two should be on a racetrack right now.
Yeah.
I'll
they're
never
just-
forget the famous picture at the Porsche factory with all the 917s lined up for the FIA inspection. They had to have 25.
Yep.
And there's a famous picture of them all lined up in a row. It's amazing.
And they claimed that every one of those was drivable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Peter, why did they go from Daytona and Sebring being on the international calendar to?
It's a long, drawn-out story. Has a lot to do with the French controlling the FIA and the ACO, and they wanted what we know as the WEC today to be the premier endurance series, and they don't really. They get along with IMSA, but not really. But they do, but they don't, and they want to be the be-all and end-all. So that's why, because they have their own championship, the World Endurance Championship.
And it also has to do with NASCAR
Yeah.
starting their own sports car championship, which
Right.
excluded
Yeah.
the European entries.
When they
all.
bought the ALMS out, when Jim
Yeah.
France bought the ALMS out. But it's a travesty.
Yeah.
So it's so bad that the WEC has a race the day after Sebring, day before Sebring,
Yeah.
their own
Stupid.
race.
It's
just
stupid.
it's just so
It's
stupid.
ridiculous. Hey, we got to come back and talk more about the book and,
Yep.
and get into the story that you've written here. But first, we're going to give a shout out to one of our sponsors. All right, we're back talking with the author, Ted West, about his novel. And that's what we got to get into. His novel called Closing Speed. So it's 1970, and there's this terrific sports car championship being fought out between Porsche and Ferrari. But you've chosen to make a novel out of it. What's this all about?
Well, I'll tell you why. When that nasty James T. Crowe sent me to Europe to follow these racing people around, I was a mere child of 27. And I was the same age as most of the racers. They were peers of mine, but of course they weren't really peers of mine because they were gods. I mean, people like Brian Redmond and Joseph Siffert and Pedro Rodriguez and Jackie Ickx, they were the greatest drivers in the world, driving the fastest cars in the world. These were faster, these cars that we've been talking about were faster at many tracks than Grand Prix cars at the same time in the same year. They were the fastest cars in the world. And I was just overawed by the whole thing. And I got to know most of those people. I got to know their girlfriends or their wives, and in some cases both. And I got to know what their lives were like. And it was a very, very tough time in racing. It was a mortal time.
People were getting killed.
People
every
were
single
getting
year.
killed all the time. In 1968, when I first started in writing in Sports Car Graphic, on April 7th, the great Jimmy Clark was killed, and everyone was shocked about that. May 7th, I started working just a couple days before that at Sports Car Graphic, and Mike Spence got killed at Indianapolis. We began to wonder who was going to get it on June 7th. It happened to be June 8th, and Ludovico Scarfiotti, a Ferrari team driver, was killed in a hill climb. So when July 7th came along, we just waited to see who was going to be in the papers on Monday morning. And sure enough, Joe Schlesser was killed in the French Grand Prix. I mean, 4 months in a row, virtually the same day.
1968.
1968. And that it wasn't always like that. That was
But it was somebody getting killed every year.
many, many getting killed every year. And all you have to do is read Brian Redmond's book about how many dear friends or dear competitors he lost in a 4 or 5 year period. Many of them. And many of them were world famous. And many that I knew, Mark Donohue, Peter Revson,
Pedro
Bruce
Rodriguez.
McLaren, Pedro Rodriguez, Joe Siffert,
Jochen Rindt?
Jochen Rindt, Lucien Bianchi, it goes
The list
on
goes
and
on,
on.
right.
It goes on and on. Anyway, that's the context where I was in amongst these people, this society of young men with their lives on the line, knowingly. There was no way for them to not know what they were doing was mortal. And their wives and girlfriends knew this man I'm with may not be here Sunday afternoon. By the end of Sunday, he may not be here. And I was amazed at that whole situation. How do people live through that kind of pressure? And it was pressure that was unrelieved because these guys had no choice. They were professional racers. It was all they wanted in life. They did it because they loved it and because they had to do it. There was no choice. Well, it made a hell of an impression on me, as it did on everybody that was involved in racing at that time. I'm not saying it's wonderful that these people were being killed. It was obviously terrible. But the fact was, it was happening whether we approved of it or not. And it made the beginning of a race an almost holy event because of the gravity of it. They were going so fast in such dangerous cars around such dangerous tracks with so little in the way of safety protection, either in the car or around the track, that you're just going, how can these people do that? There were many times when at the beginning of an endurance race, they always had, in those days, 2 co-drivers. And at the beginning of a race on the starting grid, I would walk down the grid to see which of the 2 drivers would be doing the first stint, the starting driver. And the other driver would always be there talking to the guy that was in the car. And I'd be walking along, seeing which one was which. And halfway down, as I was walking through, it would occur to me, well, in 3 hours, maybe one of these guys isn't going to be here.
So Ted, as you worked out your novel, I mean, were you able to answer the question, why are these guys doing this?
No.
Were you able to sort of
No more than I can answer why a ballerina is a ballerina. It's because you're supposed to do it. You do it because it's what you are.
I think that's the best explanation I've ever heard. You're a race driver. That's what you do.
That's what you do. That's what you do. You don't have any choice. Brian Redmond tried to retire right in the middle of his career. He went off to South Africa and got a job selling cars. And it lasted for about 3 months. And he could not do it. It didn't help that he didn't
Could
like
not sell cars. He had to come back to racing.
No,
Is
he
that what you're
couldn't.
saying?
He couldn't live without racing.
Yeah. That's what I was
He
getting
couldn't live without racing.
It's an addiction.
Yeah, it's an addiction. It's a commitment. It's what you are.
As Kevin Cogan famously said, it's like a drug they don't sell.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You have to have it.
Okay, so Ted,
So,
go ahead. Finish your thoughts.
so what I was going to say is, why did I write a novel about this? People who have read my stuff in magazines know that I report about racing. I tell what actually happened. But a novel is not what actually happened. It's something made up. And it most certainly is. This book is not history. It follows the races and the form of the races. The things that happen in the races happen in these races in my book, but the people are fiction. I have made this up. But I made it up based on what I know about what kind of people they were. And I'm not, people always ask, well, one of the characters here is a 1969 world champion. Do you mean Jackie Stewart? Because Jackie Stewart was a 1969 world champion. And the guy in the book who's a 1969 world champion is kind of a villain. Do I mean Jackie Stewart is a villain? Hell no. Jackie Stewart is one of the most wonderful people I've ever known. He's a wonderful man. It's fiction. But the stories are about the kinds of people who were racing and what it took for those people to tolerate the pressure that they were in, what kind of women could tolerate the pressure of being their wives, and the suffering that did happen between those relationships, and how it affected racing, how it affected their lives, how it affected people around them, like people in the press, like the guy who tells the story in the book, which is not me, it's fiction, but I saw a lot of it. Yeah. If you know a lot about the 1970 year of racing, you will recognize the races in here, and you will recognize that certain of the races, the winner does some extraordinary things that happened in real history. But he has a different name in the book, and he's a different character, and he's not in code Jochen Rindt. Mm-hmm. He's the character that's in the book. It's fiction.
Okay, this all took place in 1970.
Yes.
It's 2019. What the hell took you so long?
Well, it originally came out in 2010. I started writing it in 1992, I believe. And it took me a while to get through it. I was doing other things at the same time, so I was writing it part-time. But it took me about 10 or 12 years to write it. And then it took me a while to find a way to get it published. And the guy who was kind enough to publish it for me objected to one part of the form that it was written in. I originally wrote it that it's written in a present day, 20 years after the racing story, and the character is telling the story And in his present day life, his life is a mess. And he begins to realize that one of the reasons his life is a mess is because he was traumatized by some things that happened far back in his past, and he recognizes through some things that happened in the story that it all goes back to that series of races in 1970 and the things that he saw and how they affected him in his life. And then he reminisces. It's a flashback to the racing. And the way I told the story, it's the present, flashbacks, and then resolution. There are several different flashbacks. And the guy who published it said, well, no, we just want to do the racing story. Well, it takes all of the dynamics out of the story. It takes all of the relevance and the growth out of the story. And we published it that way because that's the only way he wanted to publish it. And it was left that way, but I never felt good about it. And now I have republished it. It's now, as it says on the cover, the new unabridged edition. And the reason it's unabridged is because it's gone back to the form I originally intended for it.
Did you have to rewrite stuff, or were you able to just pick it up verbatim?
I line edited the entire novel because you know what it's like. You're a writer.
Yeah.
You can't stop.
You can't keep your hands off it.
fiddling. You got to make it perfect.
So Ted, we mentioned that earlier on in the show about the Ford versus Ferrari movie.
Mm-hmm.
So we got Christian Bale and Matt Damon. So who have you thought about for your book when it becomes a film?
I've never thought of that. I'll tell you the honest truth.
Better start.
Yeah. I mean, after everybody sees this show,
Well,
Hollywood's going to come a-knocking.
if they think that Matt Damon has anything in common with Carroll Shelby, I have no hope that they'll make a good choice for anybody in my book.
Peter, you're a big film guy. What do you think?
Of what? The Ford versus Ferrari movie?
Damon, is he gonna pull it off? I mean, Christian Bale can play anybody.
Yeah, Christian Bale's amazing. I don't know. Like John said, we'll have to see it. Of course, we're all going to see it. But
Sure.
Ken Miles
course.
is such a legendary character, though. I don't know. It's going to be.
I've seen some clips of Christian Bale as Ken Miles, and that works.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a great actor, and
Yeah.
and that works. And I'm not saying Matt Damon isn't a great actor, but he's not a Texan, and he's not a Carroll Shelby, and Carroll Shelby was bigger than life.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
So people can buy the book, what, on Amazon?
Amazon, yes, absolutely. It's on Amazon. It's available on a lot of those kinds of services, but Amazon is the quick and easy way to say it. It's called Closing Speed. And
The unabridged edition.
What unabridged edition? That's what
don't buy the earlier one.
No, don't
right.
buy the earlier one. And if you
Buy
buy
them both. What the hell? Come on.
buy it, and if you read it and you like it, send in a review on Amazon for it.
There you go.
Okay?
Real good. Well, Ted, thanks for coming on the show and talk. But stick around. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of other things going on in the industry, and I'd love to get some of your viewpoints as well. But we're now going to take another quick break. Give a shout out to our good friends at DIAMTS as well as Borg Warner.
Whether they're electric, autonomous, or connected, tomorrow's cars must be developed quickly with the highest precision, and they have to be lightweight. DIAMTS can provide what you need, from advanced manufacturing machinery to lightweight components. Learn more at our website at www.d-iamts.com or visit our showroom right next to Metro Airport in Detroit.
The world is changing at an ever-increasing pace. No matter what the mode of transportation, there is always the need for an efficient propulsion system. And that's exactly what Borg Warner has been doing since the earliest days of the automotive industry. We create innovative mobility technologies that reduce energy consumption and emissions while improving performance. Our proven track record has made us an industry leader in forward-looking propulsion solutions for combustion, hybrid, and electric vehicles.
All right, we're back. And this is part of the show where Dr. Data brings out his number.
Okay, so this has absolutely nothing to do with racing. Nothing to do with Hollywood. Well, you'd sort of get, we'll see. All right, so Ted, you're not familiar with this. So Katie will, at this very moment, throw a number up on that screen, which is 234,234. That is the number that existed in 2018, which is a 68% rise compared to 2010. And that 234,000 and change number represents 6.6% of a total bigger number. And I guarantee none of you will guess this.
I have no clue. So I always try to look at what's the picture in the background.
And I analyzed this very carefully, and Katie did such a marvelous job of that. It's impossible to tell what that is.
It's so blurry.
It's impossible
I can't
to
tell what it is.
All right, so now I'm gonna give you guys. I mean, this is just gonna be, if you don't get it, it's just gonna be an embarrassment for all of you. Katie, there's the hint.
CB radios in Class 8 semis?
Keep going, keep going, keep going. You're getting there. Okay, there we go.
Number of smartphones.
No. So, you guys are killing me.
Yeah, I'm stuck. All I can come up with is CB radios.
Number of Krispy Kreme sold at a particular truck stop? I don't know.
Ted, you got anything? Katie, let's give him the answer. It's the number of female truckers.
Huh?
Just think about that. Only 6.
Well, I knew that.
Yeah, 6.6% of the total. That's phenomenally low, right? I mean, so this is according to Wall Street Journal, with a hat tip to Newmlock for having this in there. But the thing that I really find so surprising is that there's so much development work going on in terms of trying to develop autonomous semi trucks, and it seems to me that there are probably lots of people who would need jobs that would be like, I don't know, driving semis, and probably a lot of women who could be doing that. And for such a low number to exist, it's just rather crazy.
And that doesn't even count women driving Rams.
Yeah, there is that too. When we were talking about Roger Penske, and I know that everybody here has great admiration for the man. And so this week, a new startup company came to the fore in Washington, D.C., Arlington area. Penske Dash, which is basically I like to call it a micro rental service, because basically what you're doing is you're renting a vehicle by the hour from this outfit that Roger Penske has launched. And it really is rather astonishing in terms of what they're doing. So it's 45 cents a minute or less, and what you get is a 2019 Jetta SE or an equivalent. So the thing he's calling out the fact that he's got a Jetta there, and now Roger has a number of dealerships, and I'm just wondering if he has a Volkswagen dealership and he has some inventory. But so Penske Dash basically, so the fuel is included, insurance is included, they have designated parking areas. They zero maintenance, and there was a line in their thing that I thought was very interesting. Zero commitment. Don't skip the trip. Skip the car payment. So basically, he's coming out and saying, don't buy a car. Just rent one from, rent one from us. So you can rent it for an hour, 3 hours, 6 hours, or a day. $85 to rent one of these things for a day.
What does a daily rental company cost? I thought it's a lot less than that.
It's a lot more than that.
Yeah, I think a lot more than that.
Well, no, it depends.
I guess it's been a while since I rented a car.
It depends on which market.
I bet you Washington's got to be pretty expensive.
Yeah.
Because you think about it, it's like most of the people that go there are on some government's dime or on some business's dime. And but the thing I wonder about is that so we saw General Motors do Maven, which it still exists, but it's never really seemed gotten any traction.
Yeah.
And Zipcar seems to have gone by the wayside for a while. And I just wonder, you guys were holding forth about how Roger was able to transform sports car racing. We know that he's the guy who's won more times at Indy than any other guy in terms of running teams. Is it possible that he would be able to make this work?
If it can be done, he'll do it.
But yeah, as we talked, I mean, you too can get one of these cars and sit in Washington, D.C. traffic
Right.
for 45 minutes.
But again, I mean, people have to move around. But I mean, I just wonder whether, you know, his approach and his methodology and you know, just vision and purpose.
Well, look, you know, everybody believes mobility services are the real future of this industry. I know for a fact, having talked to him a couple of years ago, Roger has been very interested to play around in this mobility service stuff because, you know, Penske Automotive is the second largest retailer in the country, second only to AutoNation. So if this mobility stuff catches on, yowza, that's a huge threat to Penske Automotive, unless it can do it. So I find it very interesting what you're saying here, Gary. Volkswagen Jetta's in Washington, D.C. So he's just dipping his toe into the water and is going to find out, can it work? Can you make money at it? How often are people going to rent these cars? You know, can you rent it 4 or 5 times a day? If you can, he's off to the races. And if it crashes and burns, hey, it was just a little experiment. So that's what I see him doing.
Yeah.
So what are the odds?
Knowing it's Penske, I'd say the odds are better than anyone else. He may not grow as fast as an Uber or a Lyft or a Maven, but if he grows it, he's going to make money at it, which I don't think the other 3 are doing at all.
So another thing that came up, we were talking about Ford and John.
They released their earnings today, and boy, the numbers are not good, not at all. And I think, you know, in the media, they're saying, oh, this is really putting a lot of pressure on Jim Hackett, the CEO at Ford. But it's Joe Hinrichs that I think is going to be under the gun here because he's in charge of all operations. And we know for a fact that this launch of the new Explorer and presumably the new Aviator, the new Lincoln Aviator, I mean, they have botched this big time.
So both those cars, same platform, both those cars built in the same factory, Chicago.
Right.
Jim Hackett is the guy who's the CEO, for those who are not trading the baseball cards. And then Joe Hinrichs is running operations, and then Jim Farley is running everything else.
Yeah.
So Peter, what's your take on what's going on over there and what needs to happen?
Well, this restructuring thing has consumed the company. And I'm wondering if they didn't jettison too many veteran people who know how to get things done.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that. That's a good point.
I think that's a key component to this. And that's not just Ford, that's throughout the business. It's just jettisoning senior people who have experience in favor of less expensive avenues to get things done. But this launch of these 2 key vehicles, it's not the F-150, that's the franchise. But the Explorer is hugely important, and the Aviator is supposed to be the greatest thing since sliced bread, which will really propel Lincoln to, you know, superstar status. But to botch this launch, and it's not the first time Ford's botched a launch in the last 5 years.
Right.
So it's, I don't know what the answer is. I'm not a big believer in Jim Hackett. You know, I think when you have this kind of restructuring and then you still don't deliver the numbers, and then you have the cost of fixing, allegedly they have to ship them back to Flat Rock, because Flat Rock's the only plant capable of fixing already built vehicles for sale. I mean, it's a mess. So
we got a question here from Barry Rector from Indianapolis to you, Peter. With Ford stock near junk status, it's under $9 a share, what would you suggest they do to turn the company around?
Well, you bring up Joe. Joe would, to me, be the natural guy to succeed Hackett. But then, you know, this launch thing happened under Joe's watch. But Joe's too smart, too savvy. I mean, yeah, it happened under his watch, but I think he's the natural next guy to run Ford. And I know Bill is fond of Jim Hackett.
This would be Bill Ford.
Yeah, Bill Ford. But I think Jim's had a shot. I think Jim needs to go.
Yeah.
Like now or?
Yes, nowish by the end of the year.
Yeah.
But, I don't think it's going to happen. The other bothersome thing about Ford, which we talked about, is this electric Mustang-esque SUV.
Mustang-inspired.
Yeah, Mustang-inspired, which is just excruciating, called the Mach-E, which just...
Terrible name.
Just
Because you know how it's going to come off. They're not going to say it the way you said it, Mach-E, which is sort of reminiscent of Mach 1,
Yes.
which they used on the Mustang line. It's going to come out as Mach-E.
Yeah.
And it's just, blech, what a terrible sounding name
All right,
for a car, the Mach-E.
so do we know that it really is going to be called that?
No, we don't.
we don't.
But you sort of think so, Peter?
I suspect it is.
Well, I don't know if I have
They're
any
gonna
influence at
show
Ford.
it in November.
They're going to show it next month.
Yeah.
Right, for
the
the LA
LA
Auto
show,
Show.
yeah.
I think actually Ford has a really good shot with this car because what Tesla has taught the traditional industry is that if you come out with a car that sexy styling, super good performance, and, just is unlike anything else on the street, people will go for it. Now, Tesla's not a mass market car because batteries are still such that you got to price these things at least at $40,000 or above. But Ford's following the same formula. It's a crossover, four-door crossover, which is the hottest segment in the market right now. I've seen the car. It is very Mustang-esque. They claim it's going to have 300 miles of range and kick-ass performance. I think this thing could really have a big media
Who's
splash.
going to buy it?
If they can launch it.
Yeah, well, there's
Yeah.
that.
Well, you got to do that. Yeah.
If they can build it and if they can launch it.
Well,
with
look,
that.
I think it's going to be expensive. I got to believe that Ford's going to want to price this to make money. So that tells me it's over 40 grand. It's probably going to be at least 45 grand. Now, maybe they'll come out with versions with smaller batteries and not quite the range, but it gets the price down. But to your question as to who buys it, again, I would think that they would sell this on a global basis. And it's going to be, early adopters who are going to want to say, hey, everyone in California's got a Model 3. Crikey, I don't want that. I want something different.
They'll buy
But I
a
want
Model Y.
electric. Well,
It's just,
well, the Model Y is not available yet. But I think Ford has a chance here to show that it can follow the Tesla formula of doing fun, exciting, sexy electric cars.
Okay, so while we're talking about Ford and electric, I mean, and one of the things that I think Hackett will get credit for is the deal that they cut with Volkswagen in terms of sharing electric platforms, and Ford announced that they're part of the Electrify America, which is the Volkswagen company that was created when Volkswagen had to pay big penance in the United States for Dieselgate, right? And so, gee whiz, we get to build out all these charging stations, and who will benefit from that? Oh, that's right, we will. But, so they've done that. But the question I have, okay, so we have, Ford has said that they are developing their own F-150 electric vehicle, right?
Yep.
Ford is working with Rivian on something else.
Yeah.
And then it almost seems like this is a third thing, the Mustang-inspired electric SUV. Isn't their plate a little full for someone who's
Well, look,
coming out of the
it's
box?
early in the game. Nobody knows how this EV thing is going to play out. We know the future is electric, but when does it happen where a company can make money on it? We should talk about Tesla a little bit. They just reported their third quarter earnings. They did turn a profit. Stunned everybody that they did it. Kudos to them. I think it's terrific. But, look, Ford sees what Tesla did to the luxury segment. The Model S sells more than the 7 Series, the S-Class, and the A8, A7 put together. So what if that happened to pickup trucks? Because we know that Tesla's coming with a pickup. So I think Ford's like, whoa, we better be ready. So we'll do an all-electric F-150. But all they did was take an existing F-150, gut it, and stuff it full of batteries. What I think Tesla has shown is you've got to come out with a purpose-built EV if it's really going to catch on. So Ford has, and we've talked about this before, but I see its $500 million investment in Rivian as an insurance policy. So it'll try the F-150 pickup. It'll see what Tesla does. If nothing happens, hey, no big deal. But if all of a sudden electric pickups catch fire or a part of that segment catches fire, boom, they've got this insurance policy called Rivian. Hey, boys, we'll take your platform right now, your skateboard, and we'll make our own pickup on it. So that's how I see it. And you got to put to the extent that you can afford to, you've got to make multiple bets, different models to see where you can go with electrics.
So while we're talking about electric pickup trucks and vehicles like that, I think it's worth mentioning that Bollinger, when we had Robert Bollinger on the show about 3 or 4 months ago,
Yeah.
and brought in one of his the B1, I believe he had in here.
Right.
So they announced pricing. What was it? $125,000 bucks.
125,000.
Right.
So, Peter, you're shaking your head over
Well,
here.
I got an email invitation to send them $1,000, but
Yeah, for a deposit.
my interest in a $125,000 pickup is negligible.
Yeah.
Just not.
Well, okay, so I mean, but as you look at the market and as you look at the type of people that are buying these vehicles, which at this point, as you say, John, are mainly early adopters, I mean, is there a case to be made? I mean, or is this just basically a vanity project?
Well, I mean, they're aiming at people who own big ranches and have lots
Exactly
of money.
right.
And maybe they'll succeed because they can quietly drive their Bollingers and not disturb wildlife. I don't know. I do know that John and I were talking before the show is some of these manufacturers are way out over their skis on this electric vehicle stuff. We don't know when that gap will close. And as we mentioned, Volkswagen is all in. Mm-hmm. So if they can't pull it off, it's going to be ugly.
Yeah. Hey, look, we got a lot more to talk about, but we have one more commercial break that we got to take and give a shout out to our good friends at Lear.
Lear Connexus offers a parental controls application with geofencing that sends notifications regarding driving behavior and location, including curfew alerts, acceleration alerts, and speed alerts. All delivered to a smartphone application that includes vehicle location, driver notifications, and a report card of driving history, including notifications when predefined geographic boundaries are crossed. For more information, visit Lear.com.
All right, we're back at Autoline After Hours talking all things automotive. And Gary, you had brought up that we had Robert Bollinger here earlier this year. Well, 3 weeks ago, we had Bob Kruse from Karma. And I just learned this afternoon that he quit the company 2 weeks ago.
Chief Technology Officer for a company, and he brought the Rivero here. You drove the Rivero?
I drove the Rivero. I thought he had made remarkable progress with it because everybody who had driven the earlier version of the car just went, this is a piece of crap. And Bob Kruse, having spent most of his career at General Motors, and working on the Volt and the Bolt programs, he knows what he's doing.
Right.
And where the level of development he brought to that car, he made it a legitimate luxury contender.
So that was not a full electric vehicle. That was remember when the Volt came out and they called it an extended range electric vehicle because basically it does have a gasoline engine that works as a generator to charge the battery. So
Right.
it's a bit of a, but they are planning to bring out electric vehicles. So the question is this just part of the churn that that industry in particular, where companies are starting up and disappearing and
Look, I've
things
said
are
it before,
happening
I'll say it again. We're heading for an EV disaster. And the startups are all choking right now. I did give a shout out to Tesla. God bless them for making a profit. I think that's fantastic. But when you look at NIO and Faraday and Lucid and Byton and Karma, and I just don't see them surviving. And, everybody had all their bets, down on the China square on the roulette table. And now sales in China are tanking, of electrics and plug-ins because the government pulled most of the incentives on it. I think we're headed for an EV disaster. Now, I've also said that this industry is really good at chewing its way through a disaster. And it'll emerge sometime in the late 2020s, and it's all going to be sunshine and butterflies and all that. But between now and then, it's going to be hell.
Well, it's interesting that the Tokyo Motor Show is going on right now. And it seems to me that pretty much maybe 7 or 8 out of 10 vehicles being introduced there by the major manufacturers are EVs. Okay, you're not seeing any crazy horsepower. We had Frank Marcus on the show last week telling us about how the Corvette actually has more horsepower than the numbers that General Motors is putting out there. I mean,
substantially more.
So basically, okay, the U.S. is coming out with this cool high performance sports car. And all the vehicles being shown in Tokyo are little electric cars. I mean, not performance electric cars, just...
Yeah, but nobody can make money on them.
Yeah.
And that's why I say this is not sustainable. These car companies can't go on forever just losing money on these vehicles. They if you want to be like Porsche with the Taycan and charge $155,000, do it all day long. You're going to make money on that car because Porsche can command that kind of pricing. But if you want to go to mass market prices,
Like
$35,000,
Volkswagen is.
forget it. They're not going to make money. That's what I say.
So what happens to Volkswagen?
We shall see. It's a giant we'll see, as we like to say. They are committed all the way.
They have bet super heavy on this.
And then some. $35 billion or some.
Right. Something crazy.
So, I mean, are they anomalous, or do you think that other manufacturers are not quite as open in terms of announcing they're doing something like this, but are behind the scenes developing a lot of stuff like that?
Well, they may be developing, but they're not down the road like Volkswagen is. I mean, we're going to be seeing electric Volkswagens everywhere soon.
Yeah.
I mean, because I thought one of the interesting things, the UAW contract is, as of right now, still not ratified, but that, keeping the Detroit Hamtramck plant open to build electric trucks. Is that sort of a pipe dream? I mean, they'll keep the plant open, but
No,
I mean...
GM's commitment to BEVs is huge.
So it's Volkswagen-like, or...
Well, it's not quite Volkswagen-like because they're not as big as Volkswagen, but it's a commitment.
It's a big commitment, and this is their BEV3 platform that they're talking about. You've seen the rumors that came out. We talked about it with Bob Lutz that maybe they're going to bring the Hummer brand back. Lutz said they should make it as a sub-brand of GMC. Well, that's the segment of the market where you can price these things to make a profit. And Mark Royce has said their electrics are going to be profitable, unlike the Bolt, which is estimated to lose $8,000 or $9,000 on every one that they make. But if you bring back the Hummer brand and make it a la Denali in the GMC brand, now you can easily price these things at $70,000, $80,000 or above, and you can make a profit on them and start to build up the experience and start to get the scale that maybe one day you can take the price down to the mass market.
Okay, but so let me ask you this. So basically, Rivian is saying we're going to have a pickup truck and we're going to have an SUV. And we've seen what these things look like. They look cool as hell, right? And let's just say, for the sake of argument, that they're out in the market before this, electrified or a Hummer-inspired electric SUV.
Well, let's see what Rivian does.
How are they going to do?
Let's see what Rivian does, because their strategy evolves as any startup strategy evolves. We got a picture of the truck up here. But we know that Amazon has put in an order for 100,000 vehicles. My guess is what Rivian's really going to start building is not what we see on the screen here, the pickup or its SUV. They're going to start building electric vans that Amazon's going to use for delivery. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. I'm not sure I see the market demand for the electric Rivian truck and SUV. And what RJ Scaringe, the founder of the company, has said is they want to become like the North Face and the Patagonia of electric vehicles. So you don't just go to them to buy an electric vehicle. You go to them to buy an adventure. You want to go skiing, you want to go whitewater rafting or on a safari or whatever. They'll put the whole package together for you. And by the way, you get this Rivian vehicle as part of the package. Is that really what they're going to do? My guess is with Amazon saying, hey, I say, chaps, we'll take 100,000 vans, boom, that's where all their focus is going to be right now.
We got that big factory they got to fill.
They do, but 100,000 vehicles, they're not going to build them all in 1 year. My guess is this is going to drag out 4 or 5 years to hit that 100,000 number. But those are real orders. Those are bankable orders. You can start building those vehicles. I believe that's where Rivian's focus is going to be.
So Ted, what do you think of all this electric stuff we've been talking about here?
I think hydrogen is the answer. But I've thought that since the 70s. I'm with John. I think it's the idea of being able to produce enough electricity to support the entire country's electric vehicles is a hard one to understand to begin with. I mean, if we're talking about it as the answer, which some people would like it to be, that's a stretch. And what do we do with the used batteries? How do we dispose with the batteries? I mean, we're also worried about toxicity. What do we do with all that?
Yeah.
I think there are all kinds of problems.
Yeah, big challenges ahead. Hey, Ted, as long as you're talking, we got a question here from a viewer, Rick Glessner. He says, thank you for all your great work. He says, I've been using the term sport futility for years, and I give you credit every time. Did you come up with that, sport futility?
I've never heard it before. But I like
You don't
it.
remember your own writing.
I like it, and I'll use it.
No, you missed it. You should have said, why, yes, I did.
Yeah, I have a trademark on that.
So we were talking about racing before, too. Chuck Grenche writes in, and boy, I so identify with this. He says, I remember back in the day when watching a race on television, there were none live. Your best bet was Wide World of Sports with Jim McKay, and only a few selected at that. While there are a few good racing movies, generally Hollywood on board is a tough sell.
Yeah, I still think Grand Prix was the best of
Yeah.
them. And, that conversation between James Garner and Yves Montand in the hotel room, Pete, do you ever get tired of the driving? And Jim Garner says, well, no, sometimes I get very tired, very tired.
So did you see it at Cinerama downtown?
Yeah.
Ted, we got another one for you. South Carolina Osprey says, the book, Closing Speed, why fiction? Seems like there's a need for a factual historical account.
I don't have a good enough lawyer. I'm sure there are people who would be interested in doing that. I'm not. There are all kinds of tall tales to be told about racing, but I wanted to tell a story that gets at the heart of what's difficult about racing, and I don't want to do that with the danger of destroying anybody's reputation. So,
Fiction is a nice way of taking care of that.
yeah, I think that was my solution anyway.
Did you write a series of articles for Road and Track as a result of your
Oh yeah.
trip? So,
Yeah,
so
the
that
race
was
reports.
each.
There are race reports. Yes. Yes. For
So maybe you could just take those race reports and then just expand upon them.
They're badly dated.
Okay, we got another question here. Andy G wrote in to ask, what do we think of Motor Trend's C8 dyno test? Says, naturally aspirated 6.2 cannot make over 600 pound-feet. I'm not sure what that last reference is to, but.
What, the torque?
Torque.
Yeah.
Yeah. Torque.
No, I know it's torque, but what does he mean a 6.2 can't make over 600 pound-feet?
They must have got that on their test. I didn't see it.
Yeah.
Okay, so Why would General Motors come out with a number that is substantially lower than what Motor Trend has? I mean, wouldn't you sort of think it'd be the opposite way?
No, I think it's actually pretty smart.
Well, number one, it can help from an insurance
Right.
standpoint. You know, you keep it under 500 horse, maybe you don't get zinged as much by
Yeah, I think it's
insurance
pretty
company.
smart because then they're going to have subsequent hotter versions, and then they can probably dial up the horsepower figure then.
Yeah.
But I'd get a standard car, no options, just a standard car
I'd be good with that.
for 59. Yeah, from what I've heard, I haven't driven it, but I've heard everyone say it's the best car GM's ever built by
Yeah.
far.
No, Gary and I have driven it, and I would say it's the best car GM's ever built.
You know, I was thinking there was that a report came out NHTSA had about the person who died in the Tesla because they were unable to
Those door handles.
door handles. And when I was getting into the Corvette, I had a difficult time. Like, where's the door
There's
handle?
no door handle.
And you have to reach in and do that. And I just wonder whether that, you know, whether door handles are going to become a point of contention.
Well, look, designers would love to get rid of door handles. They hate them. And, you know, today with these capacitive kind of switches, you know, where you just touch them and the door pops open, which is what the Corvette uses, and a bunch of other cars too, not just it. That's, I think, going to be the future. I mean, designers would love to get rid of door handles and outside rear view mirrors. Boy, they're going to be in pig heaven when that happens.
We're just going to have cameras for the rear mirror.
Right. Yeah. Hey, we got some phone calls. Let's get to them. Carmen, let's bring in the first one.
This is Clem Zurovsky in Belmont, Pennsylvania. All this talk about electrification of automobiles and pickup trucks, are the oil companies just going to stand by and watch all their business go away? Thank you very much. Bye.
Great question, Clem.
I'm sure they all have copyrighted names for charging stations right now, ready to go. You'll go to the gas and shock or the brat and shock or get your bratwurst and your car charged up, and I'm sure they're all ready to go.
They could be, but, you know, you brought up hydrogen earlier, Ted.
Yeah.
That's where the oil companies are really interested, because one of the byproducts of refining oil is hydrogen. You know, when you look at your jar of hydrogenated peanut butter, you know, the hydrogen that went into that hydrogenation came out of an oil refinery.
Yeah, and your viewers can go to Wikipedia and look up HERF, Hydrogen Electric Racing Federation.
Yeah, talk about that a minute.
Which was my proposal in 2007. Actually, Bob Lutz introduced me at the meeting, and there were heavyweights from Tony George from Indianapolis was there. All the major manufacturers were represented. Scott Atherton was there. And I proposed a series, at first a demonstration series, but a race at Indianapolis, which wouldn't replace the 500, but it would be the Hydrogen 500. And it was all these rules, including the fact that the cars wouldn't have noise, so every manufacturer had to have a sound signature, which could be a combination of projected audio, the noise, air rushing over the car, but it was 12 years too soon.
Yeah.
Maybe 20 years too soon.
You were just ahead of your time, because now they're talking about bringing hydrogen cars to the 24 hours of Le Mans.
Well, yeah, and you talk to the manufacturers, and they're all say that's the ultimate solution. So.
Okay, we got a couple more phone calls. Carmen, let's bring in the next one.
Hey guys, great to see you on Autoline After Hours with Jonathan Brown. Listen, do you guys think, you're talking about botched launches, do you think the Corvette C8 is as botched a launch as what Ford is doing with the various Lincoln vehicles and such? What's your take on the 650 horsepower dyno report from Motor Trend? It's got to be nonsense. And what about the handling of the C8 rear mid-engine Corvette? Some of the magazine guys are saying it's terrible. What's your take? Thanks.
Thanks for that, Jonathan.
Well, you know, he mentions the launch. I don't think they're actually building them.
No, because of the strike.
And I noticed that Bowling Green, where they build them, they're not voting in favor of the contract.
Yeah, I don't think that, well, but Jonathan raises a good point, because I'm pretty sure that the Corvette people will not say anything, but that the program was delayed by about 6 months. There was all these reports that they had run into some electrical problems because, this has got GM's brand new all electronic architecture in the car that's going to allow for over-the-air updates and the like. The Corvette engineer I talked to said, no, that wasn't it at all. I don't know where the truth is, but I think this car was supposed to be out earlier than what's happening. I don't think they've botched the launch. There may have been teething problems in developing the car because it is such a radical departure.
Yeah, and as far as some people complain about the way it drives, I haven't driven it. You guys have, and I've heard nothing but great things about the car.
Yeah, no, I mean, when we got to drive it, it was on the street. So you can open it up here and there a little bit. We're going to really need to take it to a track. Now, the Buff Books did take it to a track, and there's been complaints that, oh, it understeers and the brakes might be grabby in certain situations, but Frank Marcus was here from Motor Trend last week, and he said, forget all those complaints. People are talking about it with traction control and stability control on, and you can dial those things down or turn them off altogether. And his take was, this is just a terrific driving car. So I'll withhold my personal judgment till I get it on a track and can push it, the envelope. But I think this is an amazingly good car.
Well, and let's not lose sight of the fact that most of the people who are going to buy this car are going to be people who are buying this car to drive this car to work, right? I mean, they're going to have this. I mean, it's a daily driver. I mean, it's got everything you need except for a back seat and lots of performance.
Yeah.
And a frunk. You can put stuff up in.
Yeah, no, look, that's what's always been attractive about the Corvette is it can fit large-size people. You can bring luggage with you if you want to do a road trip. And so it's got that everyday driver aspect to it that the exotics do not. And the exotics are sleeker, and they are lighter, and they feel like thoroughbreds. But I'm telling you, I've never wanted a Corvette before in my life. I would love to own a C8.
It's a Chevy.
Okay, one more phone call. We got to get to this one.
Greetings, gentlemen. Great show again, as usual. This is Dale Leonard out of Cleveland, Ohio. And, John, I don't have a question. I just want to give my favorite auto extremist, Peter D., a shout out, and great to see him on the show.
Thank you.
Take care, gentlemen. Thanks much. Bye-bye.
Thanks for that, Dale. Much appreciated.
Glad to be here.
Speaking of, we didn't talk about his shoes.
Oh, yeah, look at those shoes. We got to get it. So what are these, Peter?
These are the latest from Nike. They're called Air 270s, and they have about 7 different visualizations of the shoes, and this is one of them. I mean, they're so trick, the linings on the inside are different from each other. Each shoe has a different lining. So I'm immediately 3 seconds lap faster with these, I'm sure.
And your socks kind of go with them, too.
Yes.
But yeah, how many different colors are in there?
A lot.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 that I can count off right off the top of my head.
Yeah, it's cool.
Pretty colorful. They are pretty cool. Well, look, we got to wrap this up. But first of all, Ted West, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
I can't wait to read this book.
Well, I can't wait for you to read it too.
Real good.
I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah. Peter, great having you back on
Thanks,
the show.
John. Yeah,
really good stuff. And Gary, let's keep on doing this. Okay. And of course, I want to thank all of you for having tuned in.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, your journey, our passion. Lear, a global leader in automotive seating and electrical systems. Borg Warner, propulsion solutions that support a clean, energy-efficient world. And by DIA MTS, for advanced manufacturing machinery and lightweight components.
Visit our website, Autoline.tv, where you can watch us live Thursday afternoons. Get your daily fix with Autoline Daily and in-depth analysis and interviews with Autoline This Week. There's all that and much more at Autoline.tv.